Hi, I'm Maria Paletta, state politics reporter with the Arizona Republic and azcentral.com. Tonight, we begin a series of live debates from the Republic newsroom in downtown Phoenix. Tune in on Monday at 7 p.m. to see the candidates for state treasurer debate in our studio. You'll notice that for tonight's gubernatorial forum, there's only one candidate here, Democrat David Garcia. We also invited incumbent Republican Governor Doug Ducey to participate in the debate, but he declined. Instead, we will be giving Dr. Garcia 30 minutes, half of the original debate time, to answer questions about his policy positions and about his plans if he becomes governor. The Republic has extended the opportunity for a similar interview for the governor. As of this evening, his campaign team had not formally accepted. Let's get started. Thank you so much, Dr. Garcia, for being here.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Just to get right into it, Arizona, of course, has many independent voters who could make a difference in this election. Why should someone who doesn't traditionally have a history of voting Democrat or maybe even has a history of voting Republican vote for you?
From my perspective, our campaign is built on a set of values. We are working hard on policies that are going to impact and improve the lives of all Arizonans, regardless of political party, whether you are Republican, Democrat, or independent. And the number one issue is public education. And one of the things that we know is regardless of your party, regardless of where you are in the state, to be honest, everyone wants the same thing out of their public schools. They want their public schools to help their kids do better than they did. And when we have strong public schools, it is going to have an impact and improve conditions across the entire state. So when you have issues like public education that cross parties, then this gives everyone an opportunity to come in and join us if they really want to see those improvements in Arizona.
Right. We know, we've heard from voters of all stripes that education is a huge issue this election season. Speaking of that, I know Governor Ducey has repeatedly said that you don't have a concrete plan to increase public education funding. You've responded by saying that you would challenge the legislature, that you would encourage the teachers who walked out this spring to join you in putting another initiative on the ballot. Could you talk a little bit about what that would look like more specifically, the steps to doing that?
We have had a plan since March, and I'm happy to have the opportunity to talk about the plan. So first and foremost, there are three things we need to do. First and foremost, we do need to close tax credits in Arizona. Okay. I'm against universal expansion of vouchers. Those are money leaving and not going to private schools instead of our public schools. As governor, my commitment will be to have amazing public schools, and I think all dollars should go there. But second, we are going to look to close corporate loopholes in Arizona as well, so that we again are making wise decisions and putting money into public education. And then I am in favor of going to the legislature and working with the legislature and to put together an initiative for voters to invest in schools. They wanted to do this. 270,000 Arizonans with a lot of work on behalf of teachers put Invest in Ed on the ballot. And I believe Arizona wants the opportunity to have that discussion and to have that vote. Now, the specifics of it, I will work with the legislature, I will work with the education community, I will work with the business community, but what I think Arizona needs to know more than anything is that I am going and I'm committed to returning the $1.1 billion back into our public schools. Okay. But it's not just about funding, and I got to take a second, because look, one of the most important thing about education is what happens in the classroom. And here is where an educator, somebody with my background, makes a difference, and where Doug Ducey has very little to say, if anything, about it. And I think it's important to know that when I win, we're going to have an opportunity to make some big changes in our public schools, get away from standardized testing, which, by the way, is driving a lot of teaching and learning, get back to real-world outcomes, have our students leaving our public schools ready to build and create and develop. And my goal and what I'd like to see happen is when we invest in public schools, when we have innovative public schools that are getting beyond multiple choice tests, that's when we start changing Arizona for the long term. That's when we create a state that's going to prosper and have an economy that prospers for everybody.
You mentioned innovation. Of course, publicly funded schools also include charter schools. You've mentioned that charter schools need more oversight based on some of the recent scandals that have been uncovered even at this paper. How specifically would you increase oversight with charter schools without taking away or stifling that ability to innovate?
So I've been saying this since 2014. I know that Doug Ducey is barely coming around to the idea of charter school accountability, and because of a lot of work done by folks here, the public is getting a better understanding of what's happening in charter schools. What we need is we need more transparency and accountability on behalf of our charter schools, but we also need more flexibility for our traditional public schools to innovate, so that we have one set of rules for all schools we call public. And from my perspective, we need to have stronger procurement laws in our charter schools so we have just a basic understanding of how public dollars are being spent. There are some fundamental questions about the use of public dollars in some charter schools that we don't know the answers to. And I think as good public servants, good public stewards of public tax dollars, we need to get those answers. But we also have to allow for more flexibility for our traditional public schools. And one example is right up the street from here. The Phoenix Union High School District has a coding academy, computer coding.
Right.
It's a great innovative program in a traditional public school, and I'd like the opportunity for our traditional public schools to develop those kinds of innovative programs as well. And so, from my perspective, the basis of innovation is getting to and away from standardized testing and having students focus on real-world outcomes that are going to get them ready for life after high school.
Right. Going back just for a moment to the oversight element, I know you said there should be an increase in transparency. Do you think the current oversight mechanism that exists, that board, is appropriate? Do you think that needs to be changed in order for all public schools to be following the same rules as you said, or what specifically does that look like?
There's a few things. One, I do think we need to look at the charter school board to make sure that they are fulfilling their responsibilities. But the reports that go to the charter school board are still missing a lot of that information. This is about requiring charter schools to report how they're spending public dollars and with whom, so that we can understand their issues with self-dealings, questions about how they're spending dollars, and who makes up their board, who makes up their committees, and those types of things. So, from my perspective, it's not just the charter board, but it's the information that goes to the charter board and is available to the public that needs to be much more detailed. And from that information, we need to know what's going on with charter schools. But lastly, we need to take away the profit motive for a lot of our charter schools. Doug Ducey mentioned he didn't care how much a CEO makes, but if you're a parent, you care a lot about how much a CEO makes when money should be going into the classroom. And we have some situations in Arizona, for example, where public capital bought with public dollars can become private property when a charter school closes, regardless of the state of that charter school, even if it was a charter school that was problematic. That's an issue we need to look at as well, so that we don't have this incentive to come into Arizona and make money off of our kids.
Now, I know you've mentioned your education background and that education is a huge issue for voters right now, but some of your critics have charged that you are a one-issue candidate when it comes to education. Beyond education, what are two key issues that are primary priorities for you?
Well, let's start with, if you're going to be an expert in one area, education is the area. It is half of the state budget, and so almost half of the state budget. And so to have somebody who understands how to best use almost half of the state budget as their expertise is a really good starting point to be governor. But in addition, if you look at where education also fits, it is key to a whole bunch of other issues. First and foremost is economic development. The primary knock against Arizona with respect to businesses choosing not to come here, with respect to our competitiveness, with respect to our quality of life, is the condition of our K-12 schools. And when we improve our K-12 schools, we put Arizona in a position to be competitive and to lead instead of follow. In addition, it's a focus with respect to K-12 or community colleges and universities. Very often when businesses come to Arizona with high-tech jobs and innovative ideas, they're almost exclusively tied to one of our universities. And understanding how universities work and the purpose of universities as research institutions to come up with ideas is central to economic development. The future of economic development are ideas. That's what people are looking for, and that comes through education. And so this one issue touches education. When we talk about social issues, for example, talk about rehabilitation and some changes that can be made with respect to people leaving our prison system and going back to functional society, back to their families. The center of that, either treatment or rehabilitation, is education. And so many issues. And in fact, Doug Ducey, when he ran in 2014, mentioned something to the effect of, if we could fix our education system, all of our other problems would be solved. I agree, and that's the reason why you need to have somebody with a background in education for Arizona to move in a completely different direction, for us to begin to change who we are with the state and start to lead, which I think is something that's been missing right now under this administration.
Right. Shifting gears a little bit, many voters in Arizona are worried about increasing health care costs. Is there a role, in your opinion, for the state to play in health care, and if so, what is that role?
On health care, this is one issue that people have some very tough stories about the challenges that they have meeting rising health care costs and basically meeting day-to-day costs. And in addition, it breaks my heart. It's heartbreaking to see people have to go to crowdfunding websites, for example, to have to raise money for medical expenses. And Doug Ducey has looked to take away the health care of Arizonans. He encouraged John McCain to support the repeal of the ACA, for example, which would have taken health care away from Arizonans as well as made it harder for those with pre-existing conditions. As governor, I believe that to focus on Arizonans and the quality of life here, we need to work hard for affordable, accessible health care in Arizona. And there's some good ideas to do this. There's been a bill at the legislature, for example, about taking and expanding our Medicaid system to become that public option, that safety net, to allow healthy individuals or those with ACA subsidies to buy in. It's a network that already exists. It's cost effective. It's in parts of Arizona, rural parts of Arizona. And I think that kind of commitment shows the people of Arizona that you're ready to help them, everyday people, to help themselves.
Right. So that expansion is something that you would look at if elected.
Particularly as a safety net.
Okay. You seem to be strongly pro-choice. Do you think that there should be any limitations on abortion access in Arizona?
I really appreciate the question, given the focus today on the Kavanaugh hearings. We are in a situation right now where we are seeing a threat to women's reproductive health and decisions and choice that we haven't had in a very long time. Some real historic threats. And so what I think is important is for Arizonans to understand, particularly the women of Arizona and families of Arizona, that as governor, I will veto every single bill that comes to my desk that restricts a woman's right to make her own reproductive health care decisions. And I believe that is important for Arizona to understand, because under Doug Ducey, Arizona has become the most anti-choice state in the country, and it's been under his leadership that we have become that state.
I know there was controversy, I believe a few weeks ago, about some comments you had made in the past regarding abortions obtained by minors without parental consent. I didn't know if you wanted to revisit that and sort of elaborate on your position. I know there were different versions and cut versions of your initial comments. So where do you stand on that?
You're talking about a manufactured controversy here. I will uphold the law, and the law currently allows for a judicial exception, and I will uphold that law. However, what the controversy you're talking about really has been manufactured in lots of other things as well.
We've talked a little bit about education, healthcare, pro-choice issues, abortion. Shifting gears once again to housing, which is an issue at the forefront of a lot of Arizonans' minds, particularly those low income or who consider themselves middle class. Does the state have any role in ensuring there are affordable housing opportunities for Arizonans?
It's interesting you asked me this question, because I believe it's on the forefront of a lot of Arizonans' minds. It doesn't come up a lot. And I think one of the reasons why is because the state hasn't taken a role in this issue. I learned about the issue with affordable housing, or really came to appreciate it, and homelessness, by the way, talking to cities and towns. Because in talking to cities and towns and mayors, they were talking about how this issue, homelessness or affordable housing, is something that they're each individually working on to various degrees of success, depending on the size of the city and the efforts that they're putting in. But there's been a lack of statewide focus on this issue. And what they're asking for is for the state to bring people together, to start to focus resources, to work on this issue as a state instead of individual cities and towns. I think that is a fantastic idea. I think it's a reasonable request and an opportunity for the state to take some leadership in this issue. But the challenge, I said right now, is that it is individual cities and towns, and I do believe there's an opportunity for the state to bring people together and to put some focus and to start putting some policies together on affordable housing and homelessness.
Right, absolutely. Definitely related. The governor has devoted a lot of time, a lot of resources to opioid addiction. Are we as a state, in your opinion, doing enough for those who are addicted to other drugs or to alcohol? given the focus that has been specifically on opioids?
The focus on opioids has been particularly problematic because of the number of deaths associated with opioid addiction. And one of the ways to answer this question is to think of how many folks who are in our prison system today, how many people in our prison system are there for a nonviolent drug-related offense, for example. Almost half of our inmates are there for a nonviolent drug-related offense. And the opportunities that could be afforded through rehabilitation, particularly substance abuse treatment. This is another area where the governor has had a half measure, kind of a broken promise in this area, because even though I think there's been discussions about rehabilitation, while 80% of inmates could benefit from treatment, only 5% receive it. And that is a great use of resources so that when people leave our prisons, they can go back to their communities, back to their families, back to a productive life. And there is where I believe the state, and particularly rehabilitation and treatment, has an important role to play.
Continuing on the same lines with criminal justice and law enforcement, I know in previous forums, at least one previous forum, you had mentioned that you grew up in a neighborhood where some residents were scared to ask the police for help. What would you do to eliminate or at least minimize police brutality, particularly given some of the more high-profile recent cases of that we've seen locally?
Yeah, growing up in my neighborhood, you weren't always sure, and it meant that you couldn't necessarily call the police right away because you weren't sure what was going to happen. And what happens when you have that kind of lack of trust is you make people more and more vulnerable to crime, make them more and more vulnerable to being victims. And so I believe what we need at the state level to address issues with police brutality and or just the general level of respect for law enforcement, which I have tremendous respect for them, is to have a discussion about building trust with communities. Because that relationship between law enforcement and the community that they serve is built on trust. And we need somebody who is going to be in a position to take on that courageous discussion, bring folks to the table, and start that conversation. And again, I'm uniquely in a position to be there because I've been on the other side. We've had some incidents at my home with my own family, for example, with the police that I will never forget. And while I can't forget those incidents, I can learn from them, and one of the things I have learned is those relationships are built on trust. And so as governor, I will focus on building those relationships, bringing people together to build that trust.
Sort of in both directions.
It is in both directions, yeah.
We have seen a gradual increase in racial and ethnic diversity, also gender, among officials in Arizona, but many people of color have told reporters that they don't feel like they're being represented still, that they're not being heard. Why do you think that is, and what would you do to ensure that they do feel that they're being heard and represented?
Well, the obvious is to have a guy named Garcia become governor of Arizona. I mean, we haven't had a Latino elected in any statewide office in over 40 years in Arizona. The last person elected was Raul Castro in 1974. And while there has been some strides, I believe that, and have always believed that a couple things. One, you need leadership that reflects the people. That's very, very important. To trust, to communication. But likewise, if we want to look at the voice of Arizona, the true voice of all of Arizona, it includes having diversity in leadership. And I am excited to have the backing of Beth Castro, who is Raul Castro's daughter, for example. But what's really exciting is being able to be in a position for younger Latinos to be somebody that they can see themselves in leadership. I still remember, and you may remember the picture of President Barack Obama and the young black child, the African American child, touching his hair. And it's such a moving image for me because I could only imagine that child realizing that he was the president of the United States that looked like me, that is like me. And I think in Arizona, we will see that when we have an opportunity to have folks in leadership positions that are from our community, that look like they're from our community. And it's going to be exciting. I think it is. I think you're going to see a chance for Arizonans to see their true voice heard and a chance for them to see themselves in leadership.
Veterans issues are major in Arizona, especially given what has happened with the VA healthcare system in recent years. We've heard a lot from you about the teacher vote over the last several months, but you're also an Army veteran. That has come up, or veteran status, legislation benefiting veterans has come up in other races, such as the Senate race between Kirsten Sinema and Martha McSally. What have you done to reach out to veterans in Arizona?
So as a veteran, it's reaching out to them and them reaching out to me. When you're a military veteran, you don't have to do as much to reach out to veterans because they find you. And what we find out there is that veterans find a lot of respect and integrity in other veterans in leadership positions because they know what it means to serve and they know the integrity that is involved with putting on the uniform and regardless of service and going out and protecting our country. One of the things I hear more than anything, though, is we do not have enough counselors or guidance counselors or resources available for our veterans to draw down all of the available resources that they can from the federal level. And as a result, for example, there are similar sized states to Arizona that get a lot more in veterans benefits because they're investing in helping their veterans draw all the available benefits that they can so that we have more collective resources. And of the one thing that I hear from veterans, that's the thing I hear over and over again, we need some help. We need some help to understand what we can, what benefits were available to us, and I think that kind of investment would help our veterans, not individually, but as a group as well.
Right. You've said Arizona's disappearing water supply is one of the issues that keeps you up at night. How would you balance water scarcity with economic development for the state?
Without water, we're not going to develop economically. I mean, the balance there is we've got to focus on water. It is the issue. I think we can address education, by the way. We can address veterans issues. There are so many things we can address, but if we don't get a handle on water, then all these other issues are moot points because Arizona will not be a livable place. What we need here is leadership. We need leadership that is going to bring everybody to the table and have the difficult discussion about water in Arizona. Doug Ducey has been pitting interests against each other, not bringing everybody to the table. Arizona has been a leader in this field, in this area in the past, and the way they led was going forward and showing leadership by bringing everybody to the table. When I say everyone, I think we're looking at about 40 plus different stakeholders that need to come to the table.
Right.
We will begin those conversations when I am governor. And we're going to begin them for the future of Arizona, but because I want my two daughters to live here, stay here, and to be in a beautiful state that continues to be sustainable and livable and a great place to be.
In terms of those conversations, I know you're saying that you would, of course, want to hear from stakeholders, but in terms of your priorities as a leader, what would you maybe like to see in some of those plans? For example, water conservation measures or anything like that?
So we are facing a drought contingency plan. And we have to have a discussion on how we're going to address the drought contingency plan. One of the things that's interesting about this discussion is when you talk to one group, they will tell you it's another group, and you need to have them all at the table to have a meaningful discussion. And that kind of transparency, I believe everyone will appreciate. I think they will understand that. And you begin this conversation with that discussion. Because if you invited, let's just split, if you invited folks in northern Arizona and not southern Arizona, that would be problematic. So what we have right now is a circumstance where we have interests pitted against each other, and rather than doing that, we will bring everybody to the table and have an Arizona discussion about water.
Okay. You've been running this campaign for more than a year now, meaning that you have the benefit of hindsight. Is there anything that you plan to do differently in these last few weeks leading up to the election, whether that's in terms of connecting with voters, strategy, anything along those lines? Would anything change there?
I don't think if it's different, more of an emphasis. We have Arizonans that are more active and want to see a change than I have experienced in my lifetime, and I'm a native Arizonan. And when you have new people involved, they're looking for a change, and new people don't vote for the same old politics. And when you have new people involved, they want to see a change in education, for example. We talked about violence on campus. They want to see a change there. They want to see some integrity in leadership. And so we're going to continue and focusing on ground game, getting people out there talking to each other, connecting to each other, and making sure that everybody gets to the polls, because when that happens, we win, and when we win, Arizona's going to change, and we're going to be able to put this state on a path that's going to be focused on being prosperous for all Arizonans, and really focused on more high-wage jobs in Arizona, taking care of our natural resources, and those are the kind of changes that I think people want to see.
Talking about natural resources and climate change, we've reported that with the rising temperatures taking their toll on Arizona, heat has killed, I believe last year it was at least 172 people, heat-related deaths. The city of Phoenix, I know, is working on a heat readiness program, but experts say more need to be done in terms of prevention. What would you do to help Arizona combat the effects of climate change? I know we talked about water a bit, but more broadly.
Let's take a look at the natural resource that is literally hanging over our head every single day, and that's the sun. We can and should do more in Arizona with respect to solar energy. Right now, we get 6% of our energy from solar and renewable. And if you want to look at the low-hanging fruit that can make a big difference in Arizona, it's solar, and I think and other renewables, but particularly solar. I think that is something we can and should focus on as a state. Everyday Arizonans don't understand why we're not doing more in solar energy. You come in from outside of Arizona, and one of the things I hear a lot of is, why aren't there more solar panels? And I think that is one thing that we can focus on and do right away.
With solar, people have been running on that idea for years now in terms of us being a solar superpower. You're right. People come in and say that it's something that seems obvious, that we should be ahead of where we are. What specifically do you have in mind in terms of helping the state accomplish that goal, to get us closer in terms of solar energy? I think we need to, the first focus should be on rooftop solar, and having it so that the power that you are receiving is yours. It's something you can focus on. Democratizing solar would be my key. And we know that we have interest in Arizona, a lot of special interest that wouldn't like to see that done. But for the everyday Arizonans, I believe that they would benefit and would participate in solar programs that not only brought down their costs day to day, but in the end, we know we're going to have a big impact on Arizona. I know we're getting close to running out of time here. Last question. I know you have a connection to rural Arizona, that a lot of people in our rural counties feel like attention is paid particularly to Maricopa County, but not so much outside of that. Rural areas, tribal land. What specifically would you do for rural voters in terms of concrete steps after taking office? That's great. I'm from here, born and raised, so I spent most of my life running around rural Arizona, hiking and fishing and camping and just experiencing. Rural Arizona is asking for a few things. They're asking for investment, and the state has pulled highway funds for a number of years now, which is really the lifeline into most of our rural Arizona communities, that road in and out. And we've got to focus on making sure that that our highway funds are available and access is available there. But second, access to broadband internet comes up a lot. Economies are changing, and rural Arizona can reinvent themselves, can develop new economies if they had access to the modern tools to do that. And I believe that it would be helpful to rural Arizona, and it's something that comes up over and over and over again, is to have the tools for rural Arizona to develop economically and to come up with ideas and carry them out there themselves. All right, well, thank you again, Dr. Garcia, so much for joining us. I know we've covered quite a few topics, policy positions and plans tonight. Thank you for joining us as well. You can see more coverage on azcentral.com, and again, tune in on Monday at 7 p.m. for the State Treasurer debate. Thanks.